I should tell you all first who Alison is and why she's joining us here. So I first met Alison, maybe about 8 years ago now, and I was still in my corporate career, and I was looking for a mentor. And I met a number of people to test out the chemistry, and I found Alison. And wow, well, we've gotten brilliantly. Alison's a fellow retail professional like me, where I started my career, a fellow headhunter, and yeah, and we sort of hit it off. And she was working and still does work with women on board, so that's how we met, and we've kept in touch all these years. And yeah, and she will tell you a little bit more about her background, but she's a really experienced executive director, but also more recently a non-exec director, a chair. And she does all sorts of wonderful stuff. So I'm going to, I will let her tell you more. So Alison, tell us a bit more about you in terms of your portfolio career now, the different things that you do.
Oh, thanks very much, Ellie. And it's great to be with you and everybody else too. I would have to say thanks to Women on Boards that I was able to find a way to move from executive career into what we now lovingly call portfolio. So currently I sit on the board at Sport Wales. I'm from Wales originally, and I moved back nearly 5 years ago now.
Gosh.
So that was an important part of coming back to Wales. I also joined the board of a charity. I'm a trustee, so that's what it's called when you're a non-exec in a charity as a trustee. So I was a trustee with what's called Quabai Teg. So those of you who aren't Welsh, that means fair play. And the charity is all about the economic well-being and futures of women in Wales. And then more recently, I was appointed chair there. But then I started my non-exec career with a startup business in consulting, thought-provoking consulting. And so, learned the non-exec, but also importantly, learned about being on a committee and committees and non-execs. As you say, on a foundation of having worked in retail and been on executive boards such as George at Asda, or the operating board at B&Q at Kingfisher. So a breadth of experience, but Ellie and I have got a lot in common.
Yeah, in fact, I started my career in B&Q as well. I'd forgotten about that. It wasn't just retail; it was B&Q retail. So well, thank you so much for joining us. I know there's been a lot of people in the group expressing a real interest in the sort of non-exec director opportunities, or indeed, as you say, trustees in charities, and we're really excited to find out more. So without further ado, I'm going to ask you a few questions, and what we'll do, we'll run through some general Q&A and so get some input from you, and then what I'll do is I'll throw it out to the group, and we can build on anything that people would like to know more about. So let's start off with the basics then. So tell me, what is a non-exec director role, and how does that differ from your executive career?
Thanks, Ellie. So most companies, most organizations will have a board, whether that's in the private, public sector, or as we said, charity. And there is sort of a negative. So you've got executive board members, and then you've got non-executive. And the non-executive, the best way to think about it is being a critical friend. So you're there as a non-exec to scrutinize, to really understand and support the organization. But the friend part is also about the performance and helping them to create a strategy and ensuring that everything's delivered against the strategy. So it's very much that guide, observe, support. It's not the do. And so the executives do the doing. And you have to do the
doing in executive, don't you?
Yeah. And so one of the other critical phrases, I guess, for a non-exec is nose in, hands out.
Oh, I love that. Nose in, hands out. That's brilliant.
And it takes a while to learn that one.
Oh God, yeah. I'm not sure I'd ever manage that, but but I guess that's a good point actually, because one of the things I was going to ask you is almost kind of, I guess, what can you gain? We'll come on to how you do it, what you can give, and all that. But like, what are the benefits? If I was to think, I'm quite busy, I've got lots going on, I've got sort of got a busy corporate career. Why does it help me? Why does it help any of us to kind of go and do a non-exec director role? What can we get from it?
I think too often in the past we've assumed we have to be older. I didn't even think about it till in my 50s. But really, I think it's an important part of your personal and career development, because it does teach you those observational skills, the ability to have more of a helicopter view, to really understand the whole broadness of a business, whereas sometimes in your own career or your own areas, you might be focused on a particular function or element of the business. And so in the board, it gives you that broad perspective and, as I say, a helicopter observant view. And I think that brings skills into your executive career for both behavioral but also knowledge that you'll be able to use.
Yeah, it's a really good point, actually, because you're right. So many roles, you either go up a sort of functional specialism, you know, like so for me and many of my clients, that kind of HR route, but equally, you know, finance, marketing. But then there's others where you're very niche, aren't you? Either in a specialism or a geography or something. And I suppose there's only really the CEO that kind of has that. That's the overarching. No, that's interesting. So when I think of a non-exec director, rightly or wrongly, the people that come into my head are very mature in their career. They typically for me, I think, oh gosh, you know, they've maybe reached group HR director level in a FTSE 50, and they're very, you know, they're very experienced. They're earning shed loads of money. They're getting sort of later in their career, and they want to sort of maybe move into a portfolio career with kind of a number of, you know, consulting project, you know, non-exec coaching, you know, a range of different things. And as I say, rightly or wrongly, the people that pop into my head in most cases are old white men. Sometimes, you know, you get slightly different profiles, but certainly the age thing is one thing that I've always thought of. So yeah, tell me, because obviously this is all about why it's never too early to start. Tell me why we should be thinking differently about the profile of NEDs, and you know, I suppose what could somebody bring that isn't, you know, just somebody who's gone right to the top of the business and they've been doing that for years.
Yeah, no, I think that you are completely right. You know, 20 years ago, that is what the profile of NEDs were. What we've seen is a huge landscape of change from all sorts of drivers. But I think the key one that's really important for me, and I think for most people now, is about diversity of thinking. So, you know, that comes from diversity of backgrounds, the types of backgrounds you might have had, both in work and out of work, ethnicity, gender, age, disability. So it's looking for that huge diversity of thinking that will, all the studies, and McKinsey do one of the best ones, will really, you know, drive success within a company organization by having diversity. And so there's a lot more demand now for that. And so you'll see quite a few focus on age. If they take that one, there are youth boards. So a lot of public sector and local authorities have youth boards. Sport Wales, we have young ambassadors, because you need to know what your and my speak would be. What's the customer thinking? Of course. And we need to ensure that we've both collectively got that customer view, but also importantly, you've got that diversity view of society across boards. And so there is a real step change. It's not everywhere, it's a step change. So the demand is changing. And so therefore there's an opportunity for everybody. And then we get into our supply bit about our confidence to do that or not. But there is a real demand now for that diversity of background.
Well, that's good. It's good to hear that the demand is changing, because that opens up opportunities. But you touched on something there as well that I think, oh gosh, yes, I can really relate to that. I think there's always, for me, there was a bit about, well, why would somebody want me? You know, I've not, you know, and actually, you know, I've had a corporate career, and I've worked as a partner in a, you know, a search firm. I've done various like big jobs, but I haven't got up to sort of board level, you know, executive board level in a big PLC. So I kind of think, well, you know, that's probably what they'd want for non-exec director. You know, what is it that I could offer to that sort of board situation? So yeah, I guess, you know, would you give what advice would you give to somebody in that situation where they're maybe thinking, well, you know, what have I got to offer? Or, you know, maybe I haven't got the experience or confidence.
Yeah, no, and I think that's really common. And I sat there exactly the same in my first Women on Board session, doing the same thing. You know, having been on a FTSE 100 board, all the reasons that you say. And, you know, and I don't think it matters what gender, etc. We all have those moments of concern. And I think the only way to get underneath it, and we'll touch really in some of the hows, is to really think about your career in a different way, and really understand the value that you can bring to a board. You'll always be nervous, every application
Yeah.
is a trepidation.
Yeah.
But it's starting to be clear about yourself and your career, and what value you can bring, and be aware that
Yeah.
everybody has the same fears.
Everyone has the what,
Have the
sorry?
same fears, same
Oh, yeah,
concerns.
yeah. I think no, absolutely. Lots of people that I talk to, all different sort of roles, backgrounds, a real common thing, people that I work with talk about is that kind of that sort of fear factor, and whether that's imposter syndrome or just kind of lacking in confidence in certain areas. It's it's so usual. So tell me, what you've sort of said, the profile is evolving, which is great. What are the sorts of things that organizations will look for when they're hiring a non-exec director?
Okay. So one of the givens is that you do have to understand financial performance, and that sometimes can be another blocker to people thinking about it. But really, there's a lot out there to help you. If you're one of those who, oh, don't give me a spreadsheet or figures, there are supports, financial literacy, etc., to have a look at. And also, what I've learned is that it's not on the onus on you as the non-exec; it's the onus on the executives to make it clear, because basically, finance is money in, money out, what's left. And if that's not clear to you as a non-exec, you can ask those questions. So, a financial literacy, but you don't have to be an accountant to be on the board. And then there is other elements around governance and risk, which you do grow to understand. But again, there can be some reading to help you with that. And then the requirements of a board vary depending on the strategic direction of the organization or the challenges they're having. So there may be people looking for digital expertise, maybe people looking for brand marketing expertise. There will always be audit and accountancy and possibly legal requirements. And so it's really broad. So for everybody listening, there will be a skill that you have that you can absolutely, find relevance as a non-exec. When we would talk about that, we would say we've got commercial skills, and you can use lots of words to describe that. So I mainly sit on boards who are looking for commercial insight and how to generate revenues, etc. So it's finding something that you own, and then be relevant for a board.
Yeah, and I think I remember we spoke previously, and you mentioned as well different committees that exist, and I'm familiar with sort of remuneration committees from my sort of HR world, but there's other ones as well, aren't there? What sort of committees are there, and I guess, are there any particular specialisms you might be able to bring to those, and what might that be?
Yeah, so if you join as a non-exec, you should really join a committee. So the committee, though you'll still put your nose in and hands out, you've got a little bit of hands dipping in. So you get to know a lot more about the organisation and the people far quicker. So I would definitely recommend that you sit on a committee when you become a non-exec. And there are the standard ones around finance, audit, for FTSE 100's nominations, REMCO, remuneration. And then again, there will be different ones, such as people. There's often people boards or subcommittees. There may be fundraising committees, maybe commercials, etc. Again, aligned to the purpose of the organisation. So you have a couple of standards, and then 3 or 4 others aligned to the organisation. And it's great to really find out what's happening.
Oh, I bet it is. So in that I'm interested to, proceed to sort of for a role into my, is it just a case of, submitting my CV, or should I be thinking differently about it?
Yeah, so it's a very different CV. So,
okay.
So it's our advice is really about the CV is to start with a blank sheet of paper. I'm sure all of us sit there with our executive one and copy and paste and add little bits to it. So the non-exec one is definitely a blank sheet of paper. And again, what we're trying to do is demonstrate why we should sit at a board. So we sort of think of it as a pitch document. The key difference between the two is in an executive CV, we will do it in a chronological order. But in a non-executive, we pull out stories. So so the key story element will be about, have you had any sort of committee or board or subsidiary board type experience? And that often frightens people, because they go, well, no, I haven't. But then I will always say, well, have you run an initiative or a change program, or you've delivered something, you've had to work across the organization? And really what we're trying to demonstrate in this area is that you've had leadership without authority, that you can influence, persuade. And so lots of ways people will have that experience. And that's why I say we you have to rethink our career. When I first did mine, I was thinking, gosh, what have I done? And I ran the Children in Need Committee at BHS, and we raised £3 million. And that was an example of pulling everybody together to something completely different, to a general, normal executive purpose.
Yes, gosh. And do you still, well, on your CV, would you still include a sort of brief summary of your sort of chronological career? Would that be in there somewhere? It just wouldn't be structured around that framework.
Yeah, no, completely right, Ellie.
Yeah.
You would have your sort of what I call that sort of board committee type section, and then you would go into your executive career and give a shortened element of that.
Yes.
Again, just illustrating really, or evidence of those key skills that you can bring to the board.
Yeah, no, fantastic. And I'm sure people might have more questions on that, so we'll carry on, but I've already seen a few people typing questions, so we'll pick them up at the end. So what else, apart from obviously your CV there, what else do you need to think about, consider and prepare for, if you're going to apply for a NED role?
When I think about the CV, that's about looking inwards to ourselves, but we also, with all good communication, have to look outside and think about the target. And so it's often, I can only speak for myself, you have no idea about the breadth out there at all of the types of organisations you could contribute to. And so this is my start of a plug for Women on Boards, is that we do pull together all the roles that we can get hold of on a weekly basis. And that's very useful just to have a look at the breadth of the types of organisations you could join. So similar to Ellie, I thought I could only operate within the retail space, probably. And then when I looked and saw other areas, I thought, oh, well, no, actually, other people want those skills. And so I was able to move into the charity sector and then into the public sector. And I think also, bearing in mind, you may all still be developing your executive career, moving into other sectors is a way of avoiding conflict of interest. But also it's a way of broadening your knowledge and your thinking. So I would always don't be afraid, step out of the comfort zone and think about those targets.
And that might be a good way to get some different sector experience. Certainly I know, from my headhunter days, that many clients, when they're hiring, directors in the sort of, in the corporate world, in many cases, people would say, oh yes, we're open-minded on what sector people come from, but then they would end up hiring another person from the industry because there was that sort of shortcut that they could get up to speed a bit quicker, and they'd usually brought some sort of extra skills with them that were helpful. And certainly retail is a great example of that retail can in many cases be a bit blinkered about wanting other leaders from retail, and so it's really hard to get into retail that further down your career if you haven't been in retail, which is totally silly, but it does happen. And I've seen that, I've seen that from the headhunting world. So actually I suppose it's wonderful if you could get into sort of different sectors in a different way, and I suppose the more you do that, the more sort of breadth you're getting as well.
Completely.
No, fab. So how would you find a non-exec director role? This, I used to get asked this a lot actually when I was when I was in the headhunting world, because it is quite different, isn't it? It's a different sort of approach to finding a job to the sort of the sort of traditional executive search. I think some of the bigger PLCs will use executive search for NEDs, won't they? But I think aside from those, some of the smaller or maybe those that aren't generating so much revenue, they're not going to be able to afford to bring in a sort of big search firm to do a sort of basically what it's a sort of part-time NED role. So what sort of different things should we be thinking about to learn about non-exec director roles, where they are and how we can get at them?
Yeah, no, you're completely right. There will be specific ones that will go through executive search, FTSE 100 and some charities for non-exec roles. And a lot of organizations will advertise them because they want to, going back to that diversity, they want to fish outside their normal pond and really get it out there. So there will be adverts. And any governments, whether it's UK, Australia, or etc., will always have a public appointments element to their websites to have a look at.
Yes.
So, there are routes to find out, as well as using LinkedIn, and we'll come on to LinkedIn, I think, a little bit further.
Yeah.
But that's why, without doing my sales plug for Women on Boards, that's why that sort of organization is really useful, because they pull together all of the roles that are both advertised in the sort of known space, but also create links with corporate clients to actually post roles there. But there's no getting away from it that even with all of that, that the network still happens. So there's still the pat on the shoulder and things like that. So, you know, we can go into maybe a bit more about how to leverage your own network to hear about them. But it's definitely advertised, executive search, join an organization that's got transparency, and think about your network.
Yeah, and the network one's a really important one, actually. I was talking to a friend of mine today who's a HR director, and you know, she was saying, you know, there's certain, this is about Singapore, but there's certain people that are really well connected in that space. So if you want to go and do a role like that, there's a number of people that always know everything that's going on, and if you're connected with them, you know, and they get to know you, you're going to be hearing about things. And obviously, until you get into that world, you're probably not going to know who those people are. But I think that's where it comes down to sort of, you know, doing some research and harnessing your network and actually asking people more. So what advice would you give people on the network side?
So I think that, you know, one point I would make, which I didn't say then, sorry, is if you're looking at a charity or a not-for-profit, then I would go direct to them if you're really interested.
Okay,
and this is about having, you know, a passion or a drive, you know, clearly mine's around equality and diversity. So I look at those elements, and the same for everybody. And don't be afraid to contact them directly, because they're always looking for talent. And although there may not be a rotation of roles, so they will know of what's happening. And if you express interest and keep in touch, then that's a great way of doing that as well, going direct to a charity.
And who would you contact in the charity? Would you go to, who would you sort of seek out and contact?
Yeah, the chair or the chief exec.
Okay, yeah.
And you can do that through LinkedIn,
readily
etc.
available. That's easy.
And that's, you know, if it's in the UK, that's in the Charity Commission, so you can get that information. So you know where
or if not,
go.
Google.
Quite.
Google is a great friend.
Definitely.
No, that's fab. Okay.
And I think on your network, my advice is, you know, it doesn't have to necessarily be somebody who's a Ned, but who might know of somebody. And so the approach can often be, is if you spend time on creating a non-exec CV, is use that as your sort of entry into the network. So think about your network and who do you know? There might be a board member that you work really closely with who might have a contact, etc. There may be somebody on the school gate who's in a role. But having a CV and or a bio, and also knowing what you want to ask for, is really important. So doing all of that prep and then taking that out to your network.
Yeah, that's a very good point there about what you're asking for. And I think that that's whether it's non-exec director or exec director or any other help you need with your network, you're absolutely right. Because I think if you don't actually clearly go to people with a specific clear request, you know, people are just like, well, you know, how can I help? And I think you want to make it easy for them by just sort of being really clear. But you're right. I mean, everybody's got a network of friends, family members, and it's almost that it's sort of levering through that, isn't it, to say, well, who, you know, because I think, gosh, I know quite a few people that have done portfolio careers, and I could speak to them and say, well, how did you find those roles, and what did you do, and then who do you know that's doing that now, and almost sort of working through that. And I think certainly from my experience, just generally with networking, people are usually really willing to help, aren't they? So people are usually like, you know, they're happy to help, and and sort of help you, point you in the right direction, or give advice. I think generally it's a sort of quite a friendly sort of you know, community where, you know, wherever you are in the world, actually. So I'm going to just scroll back up some questions, because I've seen a few coming in, and we can just sort of whiz through them. And then what we'll before at the end, we'll sort of give people info on sort of where they can go to find more information as well. So let's have a look. It's great seeing all your messages. Thank you, everybody. Jenny, glad you got your sound sorted out. Right. So, okay. So, right. Question here. First question from Jamelza here. Yes. So good point. So one of the reasons that she often thinks about the age profile is that at the moment she has a full-time day job. And she was thinking that if she waited till she was retired from the full-time day job, it should have more time on her hands, essentially. Yeah. She's sort of saying, how can people fit in a non-exec director role at the same time as having an executive director, like a full-time big job? You know, ultimately that people are often in quite big jobs, aren't they, if they're thinking like that? So how do you manage both? Is it possible?
Yeah, and I think it's a good question, and it is important to find out firstly what time is expected from you from that organization, which maybe we can pick up on. But it's also then this is why I think it's really important to establish that you can do this. So I would often use this as a personal development conversation within your organization, and talk to ensure that you've got permission that in your terms of employment that you're allowed to do it. Notify, speak to your boss or whoever is relevant about this, and then talk to them maybe about saying, well, this could be seen as personal development. So if I need to give 10 days, you know, by the time you do board meetings, prep, etc., maybe we could share that investment together. So rather than sending me on a course that's worth £5,000, you give me 5 days or 10 days even to do this. And we are finding that, you know, a lot of organizations are being very open to those conversations. So I would definitely use that. If that's impossible, then it's about, when you're looking at the organization you're looking to join, it's thinking about when and how they do their meetings. The upside of COVID is it has completely changed that landscape. So you don't physically have to be somewhere, and it's probably going to be like that for another year. So I was on a session with the chairs of all the public sector in the UK, and all of them are saying that that even when COVID disappears slightly, they will have a hybrid model, i.e. mostly on Zoom and 1 or 2 meetings in person. So I think that will really help people manage their time, because you don't have to commute or get from a different place.
That will make a big difference.
And I think that diversity of thinking, people are very aware. If they want diversity of thinking, they have to have diversity of approach about their meetings. So, you know, does it have to be at 9 o'clock in the morning? Could it be in the evening, post childcare, etc.? So I would ask those questions when you're looking at the organisation. So look for support from your own organisation and understand the amount of time and how they do their meetings in your chosen or spotlighted organisation you want to go to.
And I suppose as well, actually, when you're talking about the kind of personal development conversation, the development you're getting that you touched on at the beginning there about that sort of, you know, developing your strategic thinking and that helicopter view and sort of, you know, more P&L experience, all those sorts of things, actually it's going to benefit your existing organisation as well, because you're going to sort of be bringing a new set of skills that maybe you wouldn't have got if you just always are sort of just in one organisation.
Yeah,
just on that, a follow-up question on that one, you mentioned about sort of fitting it all in, and the number of days vary. What sort of range have you seen for, like, almost what's the biggest one you've seen in terms of number of days per year, and what's the sort of lightest one, and sort of what's the average range that's out there?
You know, FTSE boards or 250 boards are usually quite large, so looking at about 25 days or so.
Okay,
But
so that would be hard with a full-time job.
No, definitely.
But
I think my words of advice to anybody is, when you see, oh, it's 5 days, is that everybody lies, quite frankly.
They're all liars.
You just don't take that and go, oh, 5 days, I can do that. Just understand that exactly what that means. So obviously what I've mentioned is that might be just for to being on a board, and I would advise to be on a committee, so that would be double. And the time is usually to read a board paper. I would always set aside a good day, or at least 3/4 of a day, to go through the preparation. Then you've got the board meeting, then you've got post follow-up. So it's thinking about in that context. And you know, some organizations would like you to be ambassador. So there will be events which are usually joyous because you'll care about it, but it is time. So it's you know, scratch under the surface and find out exactly what they mean. It's not always what they say on the tin.
That's useful, and that's a really good point though that you say there about, you know, I think if you're selecting the right sort of organisation, I kind of think for me, I'd want to go for something I was really passionate about, you know, whether that's a cause or whether it's a product, a startup, but something that I really believed in. And it's almost, if you can get that development and experience along with something you're really passionate about, it's, you know, it's bonus, isn't it? It's like, so you're investing the time, but you're going to really enjoy it. I think it would be hard to get excited about it if it wasn't, if it wasn't ticking those boxes for you.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
I'm going to whiz down some.
I would just add to that is that, most
Yeah.
engagements are at least 3 years, if not extended to 6
Okay.
years, 2 terms. So it's a term.
Okay.
And therefore, if you're going to spend 3 years with something, it's got to be something
Yeah.
you want to really contribute to.
Yeah, that's very, very good point. And so it's then that's the thing. It is a serious investment, a serious move, isn't it? I guess you need to sort of, do your research carefully.
Yeah.
So Emily, good evening to you, Emily. What are the differences between a non-exec director and an advisory board member? Is it just the liability?
Yeah, so non-execs are liable, depending which country you're under, understand the different requirements from that. Advisory boards often don't have that liability. But again, you have to be very careful on this, because there is a thing, sort of a proxy board member, that you can actually fall into being a non-exec board member, therefore liable, without actually being named on Companies House or something of that nature. So it depends on what the content of the advisory role is. And so often, if it's a proper advisory role, it will have clearly defined terms of reference, and it is about advice about a particular growth or area. You have to be careful that it's not really a pseudo board, just called advisory, because you could get caught up in liability.
Okay, so again, that's important to do some research in that area to know exactly what you're signing up for, and I guess what you could. No, thank you. Right, we've got a question. Hazel, hi Hazel. There are organisations that aim to be able to help you get a non-exec director role if you become their member. Have you ever, and do you think, wow? Okay, so am I right? So my understanding, so Women on Boards is an example of that. Say as well, listening, Women on Boards is open to gentlemen as well. It's all about getting more diverse boards, globally, but it's not only for women. So that's just, that was the name they started with. So just so you're aware of that. And so I used to be a member of Women on Boards, which is how I met Alison, because actually I got my mentor through Women on Boards, and I paid. It wasn't a lot at all. I think I paid something like maybe £149 a year in the UK, or 199, something like that. And I got a year's worth of membership, and I could access all of their vacancies. Now, Hazel, what they didn't do, they didn't help me. It was more of they helped me through Alison, of course, but it wasn't a case of you join us and we get you a job. It was more about you join us and we've got someone here who's pulling all these jobs together, and you get to access them all and you can then apply for them. Are you aware, Alison, of any different sorts of models, that aren't just about a sort of a support and an aggregator, but maybe that they're actually sort of doing more than that? Have you come across any of those?
Yeah, so I'll just add to the Women on Boards that it is a toolkit. So everything is there for you to take control and make your decisions and get that role. So we usually have, on average, we're now getting, 5 successes a week through people using the toolkit. And it is, my plug, 195 for the UK, 220 for global membership. So they are based in Australia, which obviously helps Asia Pac, and then the UK and Europe. And there are other organisations, and I've been a member of others, such as In Touch, and there's NED Professionals. These are UK based, but there are others in America and Australia. And I think it is about checking out what you get for it, because what they may have sometimes is they may have a link with a particular executive search, and they get to know those roles, whereas Women on Boards wouldn't. But you also have to pay a lot more money. So it's doing my BBC, there are other companies available, but we're the best.
We're the best and great value.
Yeah.
But and I think that's a good point though, isn't it? It's that kind of researching, and I think I tend to go for things when they've been recommended to me as well. I tend to go for things if someone recommended Women on Boards, and I kind of did some research, and I was really impressed, and I thought it was great. But there are others out there, so I think it's a case of talking to your network, seeking advice from people. This group that you're in is a great resource, so please always feel free to post questions in here and ask, because there might be other members that have experienced different things. So please always do use us as well for that. Here we go. Now, Andrew, good evening, Andrew. Andrew, how much would being a trustee help in getting a NED role?
Yeah.
Oh, no. this is a language thing, isn't it? The trustee and ned thing.
So a trustee is a not paid for. So you're not paid. So in
Ah,
charities
oh, okay.
charities in the UK, you sit on the boards, but you're not paid. So you are given your time free. In the US,
Ah.
it's slightly different. You have to pay to get on to be a trustee in America, and I'm not quite
Oh,
sure in
really?
Australia, but I
You
think
have
it,
to
yeah.
pay them to do the work for them.
Yeah, so that's a philanthropic approach, I
Oh,
guess.
okay. Okay.
But
Yeah.
in Australia, I think it's similar to the UK. But obviously, check each of those out.
Yeah.
And so sometimes in people's minds, it's well, if I'm not being paid for, it's not being serious enough, etc. I think I can only say from my own personal experience, having been on exec boards and then going to a charity board, is actually I find charity boards far stronger on governance and risk. And we like to think all our private companies are, but probably not as good as some of the charity ones. So
Ah,
again, it does
okay.
depend, as in all things, about the size, etc. So depending on your passion, your interest, it's always good to look at, well, how big is this charity in terms of the money they're dealing with, or its reach, its influence, because many are about influencing policy in governments, etc., as well as delivering services. So
Yeah.
finding out about their reach and how that fits to your portfolio of skills.
Mm. Mm.
I do know from a personal point of view, then when I applied for public sector roles, I was told late after I got one that I only got the public sector one because I'd been in the charity. And so,
Okay. Okay.
again, if you're looking to go from private business into public charity sector, that's a bridge, and people have to trust that you understand, Nolan principles, public servants, etc. And likewise,
Yeah.
those who are going from public sector into private sector, it's what are they taking from one to the other. So often, to answer directly your question, being a trustee in a good sized charity is not a barrier; it's a strength to being a non-exec somewhere else.
And I guess going back to your point earlier about the CV and how you present your CV, and you're drawing out those examples, those stories of when you've had to sort of influence. I guess even if it wasn't a huge trustee role, it's another example of when you have been contributing and when you've been, drawing on those influencing skills. You've been working in a committee type of environment. So I suppose if you've never done anything like that, that would be, it would be more to your portfolio, wouldn't it, in terms of your experience?
Completely. Yeah,
Yeah,
completely.
no, that's useful. Thank
Yeah.
you. Jenny, good evening, Jenny. What, if any, are the differences in expectations of paid and unpaid roles? Oh, good question.
I think, I would separate, the paid roles into different elements as well. So, if we look at FTSE 100 to 50 type organizations, there would be, real expectation, particularly in FTSE 100, of a similar experience. And for any of those ilk, whichever country in the world we're at, then that, the understanding of finance, etc., will be, a high requirement. But then when you look at other paid roles, and I guess I touch on that in terms of, you're not going to make a fortune if you do it in public sector. So that's less money, but still high expectation about what you will bring, both from a skills but behavioural point of view. And then when we look at private companies, there's a whole range of size of companies and expectations. That can be anything from, if we're linking it to pay, anything from 5,000 a year to 25, 30,000 a year. But the general skills of finance, governance, understanding board behaviours, those will pretty be standard. And then it's the what you bring to the table skills that will set the slightly different bar.
Yeah, no, for
I
sure.
hope that answers properly. That was a bit
cool. Jenny, if there's any follow-on questions,
yes,
pop
please.
it at the bottom and we'll keep coming down. So we've got another question now. Demelza, is it realistic? Oh, also about pay, actually. So building on this, is it realistic to get a paid NED in the first instance, or typically do you have to go for the volunteer roles first to get launched into the sort of bigger money opportunities?
Yeah, I'd say there's no typical path. It very much depends on you, the individual, and your experience. So it'd be very difficult for me to give a set answer. I think it's, as Ellie illustrated, is that when you unpick your CV and you look at, well, what have I got to demonstrate the ability to help leadership without authority, it depends how strong that is as to whether you will get a paid role. So for some people working in really large multinational, international companies, where they may sit on either initiatives or committees of change that impact on multiple countries, that might be a stronger strength, for instance, than somebody who sat on a charity, very large charity board, in the eyes of the appointing company, chair. So there isn't one answer. It's really about know yourself, as Ellie described.
Yeah, so, yeah, and I guess in some ways, although it's a completely different role, there are similarities in their recruitment process to the exec director role. They maybe have more open-mindedness about transferability of skills. So, for example, crossing sectors. But I guess ultimately, if there's a FTSE 100 company hiring a NED, they're not going to go, they're still going to look for track record in certain things and sort of credibility, gravitas, proven track record, and so on, that you're not going to suddenly just land in those. Like, it's going to be exactly like probably even harder, because you have to interview like with the chair. So okay, so follow on question from Emily just about the liability.
Yes, I saw that.
She said, would you suggest taking personal liability insurance and or engaging as an advisor or NED through a limited company rather than direct? What are the different options for that?
So I can only speak from a UK knowledge point of view, so apologies for those in Singapore.
No, that's okay.
But all companies and all charities have NED insurance. And in fact, that is your first question you ask in your induction, is what are the insurance for director liability? It's the ownership is really upon the company to ensure that you've got that, but it's your personal ownership to make sure they do it. So
it's a good thing to check.
Yeah. So you don't need to be a limited company, etc., or anything of that nature. You just ensure they've got the liability. But I can't speak. I'm sorry. Definitely, our Australia group would be able to give you advice about that for other countries around Asia.
Okay. No, definitely. And I think it's just good to have it as something that's on your list to research more into. I think, at the end of the day, people need to do their own research for the country and the sort of business, the sector they're looking at. But it's good to have it on your list of things you need to go and explore further. So thank you. So, okay. So Hazel, follow on about the membership organisations. Yeah, so she said she gets a lot of adverts on LinkedIn for these sorts of membership organisations. So she'd always prefer one that's recommended. I think that's so true. I think just sense check it with your network, because I'm sure, like all, it's the same in the executive world. You get some absolutely wonderful search firms and you get some not so wonderful search firms, and even within them you'll get a mix of different consultants. So I think with all these things, it's about sort of doing your research and harnessing your network and talking to people that are aligned with, they understand you and what you're looking for, and you're sort of going for the right things. I think we are down.
Should I just maybe pick up on LinkedIn in terms of that's the other route where, as Ellie will tell everybody, most executive search companies will use LinkedIn. And therefore, when you're in your career as you are now, and we're absolutely passionate, you absolutely can be a NED as well as having your own career. It's then, well, what do you say on LinkedIn? And so you have to be clear with anything, what's the purpose of that communication? So, for most of you, your LinkedIn will be about your executive and building that career. But there's no reason why in your summary you can't also call out that you're interested in having a non-executive role or a trustee role. And also, when you've redone your CV, if you think, oh, actually, I landed that major change program and I've never mentioned that on LinkedIn, you could put that in a different context of, leading major change, or, I've delivered digital, work processes or something of that nature. So the things that you might pull out on your non-executive CV, make sure that you just populate a couple of those into your LinkedIn. But I'm sure mindful that LinkedIn is really about your executive career at this stage. Yeah,
but I think there's, once you start doing trustee or volunteer or, anything that's sort of outside of your traditional day job, I always think it's great for people to add those on LinkedIn, and that might start off quite small. I do quite a bit of volunteering work, so I'm an ambassador for a charity, and I do, and I haven't done a NED role yet, but I kind of think, well, I like to include the volunteer work because it demonstrates to people that I'm doing more than just a day job, and again, anything that you're doing like that, it's all examples of when you've people in a in a situation where you're trying to influence without being their line manager, all those sorts of things. So you can add those into your sort of career history. There's a part on LinkedIn, and these, forgive me because the sections are forever changing their names and moving around, but there is one that's about kind of volunteering and interests as well. So again, sort of do a bit of digging on that, because if you're doing anything along those lines, like kind of school governor type things, or ambassador for a charity, all of those sorts of things, before you get into a formal trustee or NED role, it's worth including those and talking about them, because they're all going to lead into that additional experience as well. And then when you start doing formal NED roles, obviously have them on your career history on LinkedIn, as well as the executive career. You would probably have your executive job at the top, I would recommend, because of course if you're still exploring those roles as well, you want to have that at the top, but you could include sort of non-exec on there as well. Super. And I think we've got, do have another question now. Jenny has asked, if you were looking at a portfolio career, so this is when you're not, you're no longer doing your day job executive role, what would be a realistic number of positions that you might look at doing?
So I think if you're completely out of executive and you're not consulting, it depends time you want to give. But my personal view,
how much work you want to do.
Yes, do. I sort of read the scope for. There are people who have 6 or 7 or 8. I'm not quite sure they give the focus, relevance, energy to, and again, that does depend on the size of the organisation. But that's kind of the figure I have in my head. But I think, Jenny, it would very much depends how you want to occupy your life and your time. But that feels like one that you can do justice to all the organizations that you're working for.
And certainly I've seen, going back to that example I gave of my, my traditional view of a NED in my head, I think quite a lot of people I've seen, through the headhunting world that were, a FTSE director in an executive role, what they've done is they've gone and set up their own business, and they're maybe doing some consulting work, they might be doing coaching, they might have 1 or 2 NED roles, or they're doing, some sort of trustee, volunteer, something else. So that's another way that you can, I guess it might not be just NED roles in your portfolio career. You could still be doing consulting and things like that as well. So there's different sort of building blocks you can almost sort of put in there to sort of get your time how you want to, and I suppose get the finances right for you as well.
And I think the joy of being a non-exec or a trustee is, we've talked about what you learn from it, but also the joy of being able to work with other organizations, share your knowledge and insight at whatever level of your career. Back to that diversity thinking, we've all got something in our experience, even when we're really young, that we can add to a company. So the joy of being able to share knowledge, insight, add value, but not have to really do.
I love that. You don't have to actually do it. You make it sound like you just float in and have a nice day.
And there are challenges when things go wrong, etc. But it is quite exciting making that transition from thinking, right, that's a great idea. Well, how do I land it? To actually let's really make sure this is a great idea, and how does this idea look? So it is a great experience, and it really. I can only say, I only wish I didn't start till I was in my 50s, and I really, really wish I'd started way younger.
Yeah, no, that's great. No, and that brings us full circle, that it is never too early. And I remember reading an article, something online somewhere, and it was about a really quite young individual that was doing a non-exec role, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. And I think it was someone in their late 20s, but were adding so much value and just bringing such a different perspective, and it really made me think differently about it. And I think it just shows that you can bring different insights at different parts of your career, and actually, especially with the changes we're seeing, with like technology and innovation and digital, and actually it's not always just about having been in the corporate world and had 40 years of experience, is it? It's about other things as well. So
I think we all necessarily talk about lived experiences, and I'd say it's quite high tech. We've brought somebody in who's really young, but who sits on our people committee, because we want an understanding around that youth perspective about what do they expect from a job these days. And then I do a call out for my nephew, who ended up being chair of the youth board for our local council at the age of 17. And, you know,
Oh
that
my gosh.
took him into, you know, really growing his confidence and the ability post university and the choices he made. And so, you know, what I would also like to give a message is that for everybody here who's an executive role, maybe think about talking to HR if you're not, or if you are in HR, saying, well, how do we ensure that everybody in our organization can be a NED and help everybody, not just ourselves, become a NED and use that as part of the personal development program. And then we truly will get diversity across lots of organizations.
Such a good point to think about it from that side as well, because actually that's rare, isn't it? It's I think that the fact, you know, I've had so many people ask questions about, you know, for today and sort of show interest, and I think that just shows how little is known and how little is talked about in the sort of, you know, the corporate world about sort of, you know, the sort of NED side of things. I think there's just so much more that we can do. So that's that's a great idea. So Alison, tell me, where could people go to find out more, just in terms of other resources that are available now?
Well, obviously, we've mentioned Women on Boards. So that's a global organisation for those of you in Singapore. So it's got the Asia Pac with Australia and with the UK. And definitely do look, if you're interested in charities, look at the Charity Commission websites, and there will be equivalents outside of the UK. And that gives you a landscape of understanding that there are, for instance, 17,000 charities in Wales. And so...
What?
So there's something out there for you. And likewise, if you're interested in policy and policy changes, look at different government websites as well. There's some really interesting public sector roles that are happening, particularly in the UK, but again in Australia as well. And as we said, there are those other network groups, and one I would give a call out to is New Role. Who are really good at pulling together and putting out lots of opportunities. So there is a breadth of interest there, but mindful of your time. You know, find one that maybe is a conduit to everything, and therefore you don't have to do too much.
Do all the work. And I was having a little bit of a dig around for Singapore, for those on the call from Singapore, and there's a number of different sort of organizations, and thanks Emily to my friend on the call who mentioned a couple of these earlier, the Advisory Board Centre and the Singapore Economic Development Board. They're all kind of worth looking at just for more resources. And I had a little search actually on LinkedIn just to have a nosy, and I just searched on I searched on NED roles in Singapore, and as of today, there were 167 vacancies listed on LinkedIn for NED roles. So I think, you know, wherever you are in the world, I'm sure it's the same. And it's just that kind of, I think some of it is about just doing some research and digging in to see the sorts of things. Now, I want to do a personal plug for Alison as well here. She's going to go shy now. Alison was a wonderful mentor to me, and she has her own business as well as representing women on boards, and she does do mentoring. She also runs the Non-Exec Director CV Masterclass through Women on Boards, but she also privately does sort of mentoring support on CVs as well. So if any of you are, you know, this is something that's a sort of serious consideration for you, and you want to get some more detailed support on CV writing, thank you, Alison, for the sort of the pointers on there. But if you'd like to actually invest and sort of get some one-on-one time, I can highly recommend Alison. So what I'll do after this call, when we sign off, I will pop in the comments her LinkedIn profile link, and perhaps Alison, if you comment too with your email address as well. People want to. Oh, have I lost you?
Sorry, I just lost you then. Yeah.
Oh gosh, so so I was just saying, I'll pop in the comments that your LinkedIn profile and email, and then if people do so, because, you know, personal experience, Alison was a great help for me earlier in my career.
That's very kind, Ali. Thank you very much. I'm now blushing, but you know, I would say.
Well, I knew you wouldn't say it yourself. So a few more just comments have just popped in.
Yeah.
Oh, here we go. So Rachel had to dash, but she said thank you so much for a very informative session. And Emily's mentioned another Singapore organisation that matches corporate people into charities that are looking for advisors, and it's called Talent Trust. So that's worth having a bit of research. And SG Innovate as well. I was looking at them earlier. Now they don't list all the vacancies, but they're all, you know, these are all just good resources to look at more generally. Yeah, so I think, yeah, lots of thanks from people. Yeah, thank you for joining us. We've really appreciated it. Alison, thank you so much for your time and for your insights. And if anybody here is watching this back on replay, I know quite a few of you said that you want to and you couldn't join us live. If you comment with any more questions, I will make sure that Alison sees them and we come back to you as well, so we can kind of just sort of keep going if there's any other questions that you want to ask us about.
And I'd just like to say thank you to everybody as well, and say, you know, the battle here is to get diversity of thinking on all boards. So please go for it. We need wide diversity, all backgrounds, all types, please.
Yes, thank you, Alison, and thank you, everybody. We shall dial off now, but please do keep the conversation going in the group, and I shall catch you soon. I've got another live coming next month, and there'll be more news of that one soon. Thanks again, Alison, and good night, or good day to those of you in England.
Good night, good day.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.